I grew up with a lot of anxiety, and I still don't know the exact source and reasons for it all. It's a work in progress. But certainly part of it is, at a very young age, I was identified as a very talented communicator and speaker. I gave my first speech at a dinner of my yeshiva at age 5. And since then, the career stuck to me. So whenever the class needed a speaker, I was there. So there was a lot of pressure. And as a result of that, I didn't always have the inner ability and the resource and even the knowledge to know how to always go back to myself and know, where am I in this process? How am I feeling? How am I experiencing it? It's almost like the mouthpiece sometimes created a self-contained reality.
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have a very special guest, very well-known Rabbi YY Jacobson, who is a renowned speaker, lecturer all over the world. He's also the founder of the yeshiva.net, and he is known far and wide for his brilliance, for his profundity, for his passion, for his inspiration. And I really thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great privilege and opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So, we like to hear about people's stories here. So tell us a little about how you became the big Rabbi YY. Like, where did it start? Where did it begin? Did you ever think that you would be so well-known, so famous, so out there, so popular?
Okay. I still have to work out that question within my own soul and consciousness. I don't know about the big Rabbi YY, but I know a little bit about my story, even though I'm still trying to figure out parts of it. But that may take some time.
We want to hear all about that. Okay.
I was born in 1972 in Brooklyn, New York, in the famous Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. And actually, I was born physically in the neighborhood because today there's a large girls' school called Beit Rivka, but it used to be a hospital called Lefferts General Hospital. Mm-hmm. And I was actually born there. So I was physically born and bred in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. Both of my parents were refugees from the communist Russian Soviet Empire, where their families lived for generations. And both families suffered terribly under the Stalinist regime. My grandfather, my father's father, was arrested during Stalin's purges in the 1930s, was tortured very, very badly and exiled to the Gulag, but made it out at the end of the war. And both families, my mother and father, through forged documents, Stalin allowed all Polish citizens who escaped to Russia from Hitler after the war to leave Russia. So many Jewish families used the opportunity and they forged documents, making believe they were Polish citizens. And that's how many got out, including my mother's family and my father's family. And then they wandered across Europe.
Just a PS, my mother tells me that she actually saw this forged document of the Jacobsons. So she was in the same time, the same era, same everything. So yeah.
Because our real name is not Jacobson. My grandfather was a Georgian Jew and his name was Yakubashvili.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
But when they forged the documents, so they, I guess, changed it to a more amicable name. So it became Yakubashvili in Georgian is Jacob. Yakubashvili means son. So Jacob's son.
Right.
So they made it out, and ultimately my father's family made it to Toronto, Canada, where my grandfather was close to your grandfather, who also came to Toronto from Switzerland, I believe.
Exactly.
Basel.
Yes.
And I've heard from your father of blessed memory and your uncle's memories of my grandfather. He fell ill very shortly after his arrival to Toronto. And he died very young in 1953, and a year later, his wife died in 1954. Mm-hmm. So my father and his two younger brothers remained orphans with no relatives whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, they moved to the United States, to New York. That's where my mother's family were. So these were two refugees who built their life, like many other Jews in the United States.
Do you feel that their life as refugees shaped your life in any way? Like, in what way did it impact your life?
Significantly. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who's not who did not bequeath the story of their parents, both through nature and nurture. Both through our genetic experience and through our upbringing. I mean, listen,
Right.
my father suffered terribly together with his brothers. They suffered terribly. My mother suffered less, actually, because they escaped to Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And in Georgia, Stalin's grip was less tight because he was a Georgian. He somehow allowed the Georgians to be a little more emancipated, just a little more.
Mm-hmm.
But they both suffered terribly, and it informed, our education, simply the sensitivity. I know how my father was allergic to censorship. My father
Mm.
ran a newspaper for many years, and I saw how allergic he was to censorship.
He ran the
And
Allgemeiner, right?
yeah, so for many years he worked. He was a journalist for most of his life. So for many years he worked for other newspapers. He was an editor for a Yiddish daily, which was called the Day Morning Journal, the Tag Morgen Journal,
Mm-hmm.
which existed for many, many years until it closed down suddenly in 1972. There was a daily Yiddish press in America that flourished because you remember there were hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees who spoke Yiddish. This was their
Mm-hmm.
native language.
Mm-hmm.
So the Yiddish newspapers was really their entrance. It was their way of surviving and functioning in a completely new country, new culture, new language. As the
Right.
new generation was growing up, their children and grandchildren, really the Yiddish press became much weaker and weaker because they were already reading, American newspapers. And ultimately, the Yiddish dailies, which were very powerful, they had hundreds of thousands of readers,
Mm-hmm.
closed down one after the other. So the Day
Mm-hmm.
Morning Journal closed down in 1972. Its
Mm-hmm.
publisher, his name was Arthur Jacobs. My father just came to the office. There was a big lock on the gate. He didn't warn anybody.
Mm. Wow.
He
Wow.
came home one day without a job. My mother was shocked. My siblings were shocked. He was without a job. There was no Yiddish daily newspaper that he worked in. He had some other side jobs. He was a correspondent of Israel's largest daily, Yediot Achronot. Is
Mm-hmm.
Israel's largest daily newspaper. He was a correspondent in the United Nations. He succeeded Elie Wiesel, who was a good friend of his. And Elie Wiesel was a journalist for many years. Then he went into full-time speaking and writing.
Mm-hmm.
So my father took over his job for Yediot Achronot, and he worked for some other newspapers. And then in 72, without a job, he founded a new Yiddish weekly newspaper called the Allgemeiner Journal, which took off and did pretty well. And he ran that newspaper till his death in 2005. And so I grew up in the home of a journalist. He was a real journalist, meaning he loved a scoop and he loved a story and he loved press conferences and he loved politics. And he loved
Did
reading
that
30 newspapers a day or
did,
a week to know
wow.
what's happening everywhere in every corner of the world. And he
Do,
had this natural curiosity.
did that inform your own career? Did that create your own career? Did he shape your career because of that or not?
Well, it certainly it allowed me to grow up in a home that was extremely, extremely open in many ways. There were guests from all different types of shapes and backgrounds and colors. The people that he would interview, the people that would come visit during weekends and Shabbos, all types of interesting personalities, literally from the entire spectrum and the entire Jewish world. My father was a great interviewer, and people would come visit constantly. So it was very, very interesting. And also, he would receive newspapers from all over the world. He read also
So
many
kind of
languages.
so
Well,
kind of broadened your mind, broadened your way of thinking.
I would say that it just it gave me, I guess, access at a very young age
Mm-hmm.
to many, many different types of people.
When you were a child, what were you like?
When I was a child, what was I like?
Mm-hmm.
I I'm still trying to figure that out, but I certainly
Okay.
I did
Were you
very
did you have this vision of what you wanted to do for the future, that you wanted to be this big speaker and
no, no, no.
inspire people?
Not
No.
nothing, nothing. My the story of my life is not like somebody went to a coach and the coach said this is your vocation, this is your calling, this is your trajectory, this
Do
is
you
where you should be going. I didn't
did
have
you
that.
ever take lessons in speaking?
I did not take lessons in
No,
speaking, and I
you didn't.
never even thought. Forget about
Right.
imagine. I never even it didn't even cross my mind that this will be my work or part of my work. Um, I did
So how did it start? Like, how did you decide
my
to do what you
brother. I
do?
have a brother, an older brother, middle brother. But his name is Rabbi Baruch Jacobson, and he he shares with me, a little anecdotally, but I think it's a profound story. He says when I was 4 years old, he was becoming bar mitzvah. This is in '76. So, as was a custom then, our family went in for a private audience, what they call a yechidus in Chabad
Mhm.
language, with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. My
Mhm.
father, my mother, and four of my siblings. One did not. My oldest brother didn't go. So He said, when I came in, I was the youngest. I'm the baby of the family. I'm still the baby of the family. They call it in Yiddish the muzinnik. The
Mhm.
muzinnik is the baby of the
Me t
family.
me too,
You
and I'm
too.
proud of
Okay.
it,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. It comes with a
Something
lot. It
special.
comes with a lot of advantages. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you forever remain cute and adorable
To some.
to some. Yeah. So
Right.
and to some you remain the baby.
Right.
So the Rebbe turned to me first, and he asked me in Yiddish if der Tell mir a Maisa. He asked me if I could share with him a story,
Mm,
and I didn't answer. I was very shy, certainly in the presence of the Rebbe. So I didn't say a word. I didn't say no. I didn't say. I just didn't answer. I just looked at him. So the Rebbe thought maybe I don't know Yiddish, even though my father was a Yiddish journalist. But I don't know
mhm,
what he thought. But he turned to me in English. Maybe he thought English will be a little more comfortable. And he said in English, the Rebbe had a good English, but a very heavy Ukrainian accent. And he
mhm.
said, "Can you tell me a story, a story?" And I didn't answer. And he said again, "Would you tell me a story?" I didn't answer. So the Rebbe got specific. He says, "Maybe you could tell me a story about Adam, maybe a story about Avraham, maybe a story
Mm,
about Noach." He went from Adam to Avraham to Noach. My brother said, you were like still, you were paralyzed, frozen.
mm.
Either I was afraid or scared or shy. Maybe I was afraid of
H
disappointing him and
how
saying the
how
wrong
old were
thing.
you at that point?
4 years old, very
4 years
young.
old. Mhm,
The Rebbe tried a few times, very kindly and with a lot of, with a smile, with generosity, with softness, but I just was not answering anything.
mhm,
So when he saw that, he moved on the conversation with my other sibling or with my parents. And my brother Baruch, he says, it's interesting. In that room, you did not say a word. He was asking you for a story and you were silent. You were like a mute. He says, the moment you walked out of that room, you do not stop telling stories. Wherever I go, I hear another story from you. A story, your brother said this story. This one is sending me a clip. Every day you have stories. And where do you get all these stories? Since when did you start telling stories? And then he
Wow.
looks at me and he says, you know what? Maybe because you were quiet in that room, maybe once you've left that room, you have what to share. You
Wow.
have stories
Wow.
to share.
To share.
And that was a very
Interesting.
moving insight. And his point, of course, was that you can only share when you know how to listen. So he
Mhm,
said, maybe in that room, you really had to be quiet, just to be a makabel, to be a recipient. And
mhm.
then you have what to share. Uh, and
So, do you ever get tired from all the inspiration that you do share? Like, do you ever wish, "Oh, maybe I could just take a break and not be Rabbi YY, famous Rabbi YY, and just, not share all these things, like, just
Well,
have"
listen, I try to most of, at least a lot, what I try to share is from my soul, from myself. So what I'm sharing are things that I work on, things that I cultivate within myself. I've learned very early on that the only real speaking and communicating we can do is sharing.
Mhm,
If I become, just a public professional speaker and have a polished speech with a joke in the beginning, a joke in the middle, a joke at the end, a story here, a story there, take off my glasses, put on my glasses, it may be fine, but it's not the real thing. And it's not really what people want to hear, and it's not really what changes lives.
mhm,
It's more just of a superficial career, which is fine, it could pay the
mhm.
bills and it can be entertaining, but it's more entertaining. I found that real communication is really sharing. It's sharing my struggles. It's sharing
It's
my
interesting.
experience.
'Cause most people look at you as so polished, as such a polished speaker with a joke, with the exact almost the canned speech. You always have the exact perfect words to share. So do you ever feel like it's just, like, somewhat of a facade, that it's not, like, so genuine, or is it always coming from deep within yourself?
That's a great question. So to be very honest about this, I have evolved over the years. When I was younger and maybe less worked out, I would say less worked out. I I often thought that a speech is always about the the canned presentation, which will be fully engaging and entertaining. And there's a lot of value to that because speaking is an art, just like there's laws of writing, there's laws
Mm,
of speaking, just like you have to know how to dance, you have to know how to play basketball, you have to know how to play baseball or any other sport. Speaking is an art, and an
right.
art has its rules, its structures, even though there's many different ways to paint a picture. But just like art is a whole world and a universe, speaking is a universe, and you could teach a lot of that. But as I've evolved, I realized that what it's really about, deeper than anything else. The jokes are important, the stories are important, because you want to engage the audience and you have to know who they are. Especially if I'm speaking to an audience that completely doesn't know me, it's often the humor that breaks the ice and makes them feel that I'm normal. I often speak to audiences who've never seen me before. They see a Jew with a yarmulke, a beard with paste. The immediate stereotype is, he's weird. He's at least not, they don't say it, but he's strange. He's not from our world. And that's where humor is very helpful, because it shows that we're both human. We could laugh at the same things. We could cry at the same things. Haseth not a Jew eyes. So humor is very powerful to create a certain vulnerability and intimacy. But I've learned that really the deepest thing that I can give to people is my truth, my heart, my soul, my awareness. And when I talk especially about pain or struggles, mental health, which I talk a lot about, if it's something that I don't internally experience, I come out of the speech feeling empty. I come out of the speech feeling numb. When I feel that I'm not fully present in what I say, people may love it, but I don't love it. And when I come home, I know the difference. I know the difference very well between being a channel for God's wisdom to hopefully flow through me if I merit to be that channel, or it's about me. And it's a very big difference. People don't always pick up on it. Some do. Some more sensitive people pick up, but not everybody picks up on it. Because, he was good. He was entertaining. But there's a very, very big difference if ultimately my ego was on display. And that means it was about me. But in order for me to be successful, I had to entertain the people. But it's ultimately about the validation I will get, the compliments I will get, the invitations I will get in the future, the accolades I will get, the celebrity status, whatever that may be. And that's part of the human existence and human emotion. And I struggle with this, like I'm sure other people struggle with this. But then there is really going into a much deeper place and realizing that the greatest and deepest, most blissful experience is actually me not being there, me just suspending my ego and being a channel for my soul, which is a derivative of God. Like the Tanya says, every soul is a derivative of infinite consciousness. And if I could be a channel of that, and that comes through me, first of all, I don't need anybody's validation, because I just showed up as a channel with the tools that God has given me today to be here right now. Whatever had to come through me came through me. Also, the effect on people is completely different, because their souls can be woken up. And when I, it's also a different approach in how you prepare. If it's about me, the preparation has to be so intense, because I need to give a perfect speech. Now, can anybody give a perfect speech? There's no such a thing. Even if you give a 9, it's not a 10. Even if you gave a 10, it's not an 11. And there's always a flaw. We're all human. Sure. And then I could beat myself up for the next 4 days. I didn't say this, and I should have said this, and I said this, and that. But if I'm a channel, I also prepare. I want to prepare. I want it to be a good speech. But it's different. I'm preparing with the tools that God has given me today. And you know what? Tomorrow, I will probably get better tools, more enhanced tools. And in a year from now, if I speak about the same subject, it'll probably be much deeper and much more authentic. And I may have more insight. So that really, it takes away, I'm not going to say I don't have pressure. I do have pressure, but it takes away, I would say, a lot of the intensity of the pressure.
Right. No, so that's talking a lot. I mean, that's a great point. That's talking a lot about the ego and your feelings of ego. But what about the inspiration itself? Like, what if you're not inspired sometimes? Who do you go to for your inspiration? Like, everyone goes to Rabbi YY when they need to feel uplifted or some inspiration. Who do you go to?
Yeah. So that's a very vulnerable and deep question. And I think the most authentic answer is that I try to constantly work on myself and tune into my soul. And this is daily work, because if not, if I'm dried up, ultimately I'll give things as canned speeches, which is really what we call a con artist, which is maybe connected to canned speeches. In other words, I'll just give you a package that I have packaged earlier, but it's not coming from within. And if this is my own inner, very intimate, spiritual, emotional work with myself, with my soul, with my own support system of colleagues, of friends, of teachers, of people who help me in my journey and my struggles. And yeah, sometimes, as a human being, sometimes I wake up on the left side, or I'm dealing with some difficult situation, and now I have to come to a speech, and I may not be in the mood, and I may feel empty. And I'm like, God, can you just give me another job? And I have a child who says, Tati, I wish you would have just owned a candy store rather than give all your stupid speeches. I said, why? He says, then at least I can benefit from your work. I can keep the store and take all the
Right.
candies in the world. And I'm like, maybe that's a good idea one day. But but at such a moment, I then really need to tune into a deep place and say, okay, I'm here. This is an opportunity now.
Mhm.
And I have to go to a place of awareness. And sometimes
Mhm.
maybe there'll be emotions or body parts that don't agree. I
Mhm.
say, but there are people here, and they're
Mhm.
real people, and they came here, and what do I want to give them today? I want to be a
Mhm.
channel. And sometimes maybe I'll have a conversation about that, about the days that we wake up and we feel empty. And then
Mhm.
it's really communicating in a very authentic way. Sometimes I don't have the ability to do that. And the very task is challenging to be able to show up. There's a very powerful insight in Tanya. The author of the Tanya, B'Shnei Zalman of Liadi, talks about the fact, and this is one of his main points, that we often tell ourselves, if I don't identify emotionally, and if my body doesn't agree with everything I'm going to do now, we feel like we're fake and
Mhm.
phony. But it's not true. In other words, sometimes I may realize that I'm having an emotional and painful struggle with something, and I need to work it through. It's an opportunity to work it through. But it doesn't make me fake if I could show up for the people I need to show up in my thoughts, in my words, and in my behaviors. As long as I'm honest with myself and I
Mhm.
can hold space with empathy for all the different parts of me, it doesn't make me what we call in Yiddish a bluffer, which means a con artist or a deceptive,
Mhm.
inauthentic human being. The fact that in my behavior I showed up with what I hold to be of real value and what I hold God wants from me at this moment, even though there's parts of me who are throwing a tantrum. And I
Mhm.
think that respect
Mhm.
for all of our different parts is not only what makes us human, but what allows us to show up to every moment with our full presence and authenticity. If I have to repress certain parts of myself and deny them and say, no, I'm feeling everything I'm about to say, then ultimately I'm not being authentic. The very fact that I could say, there's different parts inside of me. There's a
Mhm.
part of me, even sometimes will get up and say, I'm scared or I'm nervous
Mhm.
or I'm anxious, because these are all regular emotions. And I can almost like hold it like a little child and give it a
Mhm.
little empathy and understand that it's acting up and it's experiencing something, and there's a trigger here, and maybe at some point I'll be able to work it through and be curious. But then I
Mhm.
can also show up with my clarity, with my
Mhm.
soul, with things that I know are very, very deep inside of me, things that I really feel for, things that I'm really connected to, even if 24/7 I sometimes don't have that experience.
Right.
It's very rewarding, and sharing that itself with people gives them and helps them in their own journeys and struggles.
That's a great perspective. In all areas of life, we all have to sometimes show up, even not as a speaker, but we're all showing up in some way or other. So that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, I
You
told
mentioned,
I told my class the other day. I said, if I come home or you come home from work, you're exhausted, really exhausted. All you want to do is plop down on the couch or on the bed with your phone and start watching clips. And I said, and even if it's my clip, if it's a clip by Rabbi YY, but your kid wants to play a game with you
right.
or to sit with you, and you say, you tell yourself, I'm not interested. I'm just not interested. I'm not feeling this love. I'm not feeling this need to attach. I just need a little time and a little space. But if you tell yourself, what is my real value? Do I really cherish attachment with my child? Do I cherish the opportunity that my child growing up knows that his father or his mother is here for him and could just really connect to him in a simple father-child relationship, which means playing a game or making a joke or doing something together that is very mundane, but it's a form of attachment. And you tell yourself that is more valuable than anything else. And therefore, yes, I'm going to get down on the ground and I'm going to play this game with my child. Like, don't underestimate the
Mhm.
infinite and powerful value of that. Even though there's voices in you that say, no, I'm exhausted. I'm not interested. I don't even want to be a father. Why did I have so many kids? I hate my job.
Mm.
Whatever. Fine. This is part of the human
Yeah.
experience. This is, I think, a very important perspective that we all
Mhm.
we all need to cultivate, and we hold space for all these parts with empathy and compassion. Everyone is telling a story that is part of our story.
Absolutely, for sure. You mentioned your children? Do you what toll do you feel your job, your career, your role as this inspiration has it taken on your children, on your family, on your wife and children?
Here too, I had to evolve, and I'm still evolving because, on one hand, it's a tremendous gift and a tremendous, what we call mission, a divine mission, and an opportunity to be able to help, assist, and inspire. But sometimes, and here too, this is my own inner work, things could come at the expense of family life. I used to
Hmm.
travel much more than I traveled. I didn't realize the toll it took on my children. Also, when
Hmm.
your father is a public figure, people
Hmm.
have a lot to say to kids. Oh, your father's this, your father's that, your father's
Absolutely.
that. So it can always take a toll. And I just learned how important it is for me to realize that there is work that I do on the outside, and it's very important work, but that it could never ever come at the expense or compensate for the real work, which is always in my own heart and in my own home. And sometimes that work is the most valuable work. I once heard from the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, something, I have to say this was a life changing insight for me. The Rebbe said, I was a yeshiva boy at the time, so I didn't know about my future career. As I told you, I didn't plan any of it. But the Rebbe, I remember, he was talking during his Shabbos gatherings, his Shabbos Farbrengens, as they were called. He would dedicate a talk to a passage in Rambam, in Maimonides. And they were very, very interesting talks, brilliant and profound. And they were learning then the laws of Yom Kippur. And Maimonides goes through the entire service of the high priest in the Holy Temple in Yom Kippur, which was a fascinating service. And at the end, he says, when night comes, he takes off his holy garments and he puts on his regular clothes. And
Hmm.
Maimonides writes two words, V'yoytze lebeise, and he goes home. And the Rebbe, in his vintage style, which was very analytical, he dissected every word in Maimonides. He said, why is this part of the code of Jewish law? He goes home. Yeah, obviously, Yom Kippur night, he finished the service. He goes on, where should he go, to the bowling alley? Where did the high priest go, to a pizza shop? Or what did he went? He went to an opera? I mean, yeah. He went to somebody else's house. I mean, that's what you do at
Right.
night, especially in the olden days. There wasn't nightlife, It's before Thomas Edison. Nighttime, it was dark. You go home. It's obvious that he went home, but he puts it in the law, like as part of the laws of Yom Kippur. And now he went home. And the Rebbe said, what happens if he wanted to go to somebody else's house? And what if he wanted to remain in the temple and study Torah till midnight? Is that bad? And then the Rebbe said something incredibly profound. And he said, what Maimonides is teaching us is that this is part of the laws of Yom Kippur. Part of the laws of Yom Kippur is you came out of the Holy of Holies. You're on a high. You just brought atonement and forgiveness for the entire Jewish people. You just brought healing to the world. And you're the high priest. You did it all. And night comes, and now there's one more law, and that is go home.
Hmm.
You got to go home. You have to bring it home. And I would just add, I think what the Rebbe meant was when he went home, what do you think happened? His wife looked at him and said, can you take out the garbage? I had a miserable day at home here. I had a migraine headache taking care of 6 babies while you were in the Holy of Holies. And it would be very easy for the high priest to look at himself and say, what do I need this? I was just in the Holy of Holies. I'm considered the holiest Jew, and I need somebody to tell me to go back to go out to the garbage, to go take out
Right.
the garbage. But the Rebbe said, this is the litmus test that you were really in the Holy of Holies. In many ways, he says, the most important part of the Yom Kippur service was that he went home. Can you really integrate it? And this was it was such a powerful insight. And he said, how
Hmm.
do you know that he was in the Holy of Holies? If he could come home, if he can go
Come
bring it back
home.
to the kitchen and the dining room. If you can't come
Hmm.
home, some people go on very, very profound spiritual journeys, and it's incredible and inspiring, but they don't know how to go home. They don't know how to integrate it into their daily lives. So I find how important this is for me that
So how do you do that on a practical level? How do you, Rabbi YY, do this?
I do it by trying to tune into my home in a very, very attentive way to the intimate needs of my own inner soul and the soul of my loved ones in a very private and personal way. And it comes back to the thing I spoke before about ego.
Hmm.
When a career becomes about an ego game, which is a
Hmm.
very normal human experience, then there is a rift between the home and the work, because at home I will never get the validation
Hmm.
that I get when I'm speaking to 5,000 people and I get a standing ovation after that for
Right.
20 seconds. I'll never get that at home.
Right.
Usually at home, my kids will have very different opinions about me. One of the funniest stories, and it was an eye opener for me. This was the middle of Corona. And in the middle of Corona, I was sometimes doing Zooms many times a day. It could be a Zoom with Israel and with Australia and with South Africa and with London and with Los Angeles and with my local community. And there were a lot of Zooms that were being done with children and teenagers. Remember, nobody was in school. So I felt there's a tremendous opportunity and responsibility to reach this whole young generation stuck at home with computers. And everybody knows this was a very difficult year for everybody, but especially for the youth. And many of them were damaged in profound ways. And I'm just saying, one night I was on with teenagers and they were asking questions. From the kitchen, I was in my office. From the kitchen, I hear my daughter laughing on top. Ha, 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 ha. Like the funniest thing happened. And I don't hear her laugh that way. So at the first opportunity, I went out to see, what is so exciting, what just happened. Corona is officially over. She's telling my wife, she's like, Mommy, you won't believe what's happening. Tati is giving advice to teenagers. Tati, what does he know? What does he know? He's giving advice. She's a teenager. This was the funniest thing in the world. It was the mockery how Tati, who knows nothing about teenagers and what to tell us, is giving advice, and they're asking him questions. Anyway, I was glad she was laughing about it rather than crying about it. But
children have a way of humbling us, that's for sure.
Yes. And so it's really, that's part of going home.
Right.
Going home I'm not going to get the external validation I get outside from people who don't know me intimately. They came for a speech or for a class. Rabbi YY delivered well, thank God, and they loved it. And they even give him a beautiful applause and say it was amazing, it was life-changing. But at home, that's where real life happens. That's where real relationship happens. That's where everything comes out, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's where our insecurities come out. That's where I'm not giving a speech and nobody's interested in my speeches. That's where it's about relationships. So the more I have clarity in my own soul that all my work is about being a channel, the less there is a rift between the life outside of the home and the life inside of the home. The moment the speech has become my source of validation, my source of feeling that I matter, my source of self-value, then the rift between the home and work becomes often excruciatingly painful, which is why many people, unfortunately, stay away from home. And the reason that many people, especially people who do well in the outside world, their marriages and their family life often disintegrates. I mean, there is a disproportionate amount, I think, of people who are very, very well known and renowned. But if you ask their children and their spouse about them, you're going to get a different report. Even in the Jewish world, some of the most famous Jews, I'll mention two. Founder of Zionism was Theodor Herzl. The one who Time magazine named the man of the century was Albert Einstein, who had a major impact, not only on the Jewish world, but on the world. Professor Einstein, Theodor Herzl, in terms of their own family life, it was a disaster. This is not to judge anybody because we all have our demons and our negative inclinations, but it just brings out, Professor Einstein was considered, Time magazine had to find the one man who had the greatest impact on the 20th century. And they had a choice between two people. This is Y2K. In the beginning of the new millennium, they had to choose the man, not of the year, the man of the century. And they had a choice between two people, Hitler and Einstein. The two people who they believed had the greatest impact on the century, Einstein or Hitler. And I told somebody, either it's a Jew or somebody who was obsessed with Jews. They chose Einstein, which I was very happy with, because they wanted somebody who had a positive impact, who brought science and physics to a new world. And yet, when it came to his own marriage and his own personal life, it was an absolute disaster because it's a whole different field. This is about your own inner work, spiritual, psychological,
100%.
Emotional. There's no accolades. You're not getting a Nobel Prize for working on your marriage. You're not getting a standing ovation for connecting to your child. But that's where history really happens. That's what Judaism understood. Judaism understood that the home is more important than everywhere else. So I think the more I know with myself, the more I go out from an ego place, which is really a place of insecurity, to a place of being a channel for what God wants from me. So then there's really no difference. Right now, he wants me to stand on a stage and speak to 2,000 people and share what I could share and hopefully be a channel for. Hineni, I'm here. Now I come home and my kid really wants me to play Uno or Monopoly Builders.
So what do you do? Like, what do you do at home? Do you do you set aside a certain amount of time? Do you spend time with each child? Do you go on date nights with your wife? Like, what do you do to ensure that time at home is so that you're connecting?
I try what I can do, and I still have to. I'm still working on it. I have to become better. But to be able to spend time with my children, to be able to spend time with my spouse, and to be able to spend time with my own soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I try
Right.
to implement that, not always successfully, and
Yeah, I mean, I
sometimes,
was going to ask you, like so many teenagers and children, go to Rabbi YY with their questions. It was funny that your daughter laughed about that because so many go to
yeah.
you. So who do your children go to?
Oh, you're opening up a Pandora box.
Ooh.
So, listen, who my children go to, I should say, I should give a sequel to the story. And I say this with tremendous humility and gratefulness that this daughter today comes to my classes.
Oh, wow. Now you know the class is good,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So that's the greatest compliment. Other people
Mhm.
come, they come. They don't really know me, but she knows me and she comes to my
Right.
classes. And even my wife comes to my classes Shabbos
Wow.
morning. So it's even a greater compliment because nobody knows a husband like a wife
That's for
knows a
sure.
husband. And
Right.
there were times early on, especially when I would give a speech, and my wife told me afterwards, she said, I think it's better if I don't come to your speeches.
Mhm.
And what she meant was that she's feeling an element of entertainment that may
Mhm.
be external, may sometimes be a
Right.
facade, and it's bothering her.
Mhm.
This was many years ago, but it was certainly a wake up call. I once visited Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz,
Mhm.
Rabbi Adin Even Yisrael, who was a great, great scholar. He authored 70 books. He passed away a few years ago. He was, of course, the one who first translated the Talmud into English, the Steinsaltz Gemara, and he was a real personality and a brilliant, brilliant mind. And I went to visit him to his home. I made an appointment Shabbos afternoon. He gave me during sunset. He lived in the German colony in Jerusalem, and he had a little garden in the back of his home. Today, his wife lives there many long
Mhm.
happy years, and he had a little gazebo over there. And he sat at the stem of a tree, and he sat me down in his little tent, and he said, why did you come here?" And I shared this with him. I said, I'm being invited to speak around the world. And I know you've been doing this many years. You've been talking and writing. And I want advice. I want advice what I should do, what I shouldn't do. And he looked at me and he said something that was very profound. And the older I become and the more experience I have, I realize how wise, sensitive, humble, and profound it was. And he told me these words. And I'm not saying it verbatim, but this was the theme of what he told me. This is around 2 decades ago, I think. And he said, "Yeah, I hear good things about you. I hear that you're a good speaker. And even my wife told me she went to hear you in Jerusalem," Rabbi Steinsaltz says, "and she was very, very impressed. So let me tell you my prediction. You're going to get better because, with 10,000 hours of experience, you get better. That's how you excel, whether it's playing golf or playing piano or writing or dancing. So you'll get those 10,000 hours of experience and you'll become impeccable to the point when people invite you, you won't even have to ask them what the topic is. You will have so many filing cabinets in your brain, you'll come up to the pulpit. On the pulpit, you'll see a flyer. Oh, this is the topic:
Mhm.
marriage, parenting, dealing with emotional health challenges, depression, anxiety, the war in Israel, whatever the topic is. You'll pull out the filing cabinets from your brain. Nobody will know. You'll present your 45-minute-hour speech. You'll get a standing ovation or at least a nice applause. He says you'll get your check afterwards. You'll go home. Everybody is happy. They had an entertaining evening. You got your money. You got your honor. You got your glory. You'll go back to your hotel room. He says, and you'll do this for 25 years. And one day, he said, you'll wake up in the morning and you'll walk over to the mirror and you will look in the mirror, and to your horror, he was very dramatic. He says, to your horror, you will look in the mirror and you will see that there's nothing there besides a mouthpiece.
Mhm.
There's nothing besides a mouthpiece. And that moment, you will know that you have virtually died.
Mhm. Wow.
I looked
Wow.
at him. I did not expect this piece of advice. He says, you
Wow.
will just have become a mouthpiece,
Mhm.
professional, but you will know that you died. There's no person
Mhm.
there. So all I can tell you is try
Wow.
to try to avoid that experience after
That
25 years because it will be very painful.
wow. You mean like the mouth will just be disconnected from everything else that you're
Yeah,
experiencing from your heart?
yeah. This is a
Ha
mouthpiece that knows
and
what to
that's it.
do. You
Right.
press play.
Right.
It's like
Right.
a vending machine.
Right.
They put in a
S
quarter, hopefully more than a quarter, and they get the potato chips or the sushi or the pastrami sandwich. And if they
Well,
want another one, they put in another quarter.
right. How did you feel years ago when your wife told you that she didn't want to come to some of your speeches because she felt that they were just entertainment or just the canned speech, lacking that authenticity?
It
What
was
did it
very,
make you feel like?
it was painful to hear. It triggered my own inner childhood wounds,
Mhm,
because really what it was saying, it was a very profound critique. From her
mhm,
perspective, it was coming from love and really,
mhm.
trying to
Of
share
course.
with me her own emotions.
Mhm,
But for me, it was hard to hear. And in many ways, it was the beginning of a wake up call
mhm,
to ask myself, is there a disassociation
mhm,
between my truest inner self and the words that are coming out of my mouth?
mhm.
And sometimes I also realize it's not necessarily conscious. In other words, it's not that I'm getting up there as a con artist and saying to
Right, of
myself, I don't
course.
believe anything I'm going to say.
No.
I just need to support my family and I want my check. It's
Mhm,
much deeper.
mhm,
It's much more sly and clever. In Hasidic terminology, our animal consciousness, which forms all types of defense mechanisms and survival skills, is very sly. It's very clever. It's very shrewd. The disassociation can be in a very deep place. It can even be on an
mhm,
unconscious level. But
mhm,
deep down, the core experience of the self is disconnected from what is being communicated. And knowing
mhm.
and studying and learning and growing up in an environment where I always learned that you have to be honest, you have to be authentic, you have to
Mhm,
communicate what you believe. The Rebbe would always say, and I heard this constantly from him, words that come from the heart enter
mhm,
the heart. Part
mhm,
of my animal soul survival and coping mechanisms and defenders could be, oh, it's words coming from the heart. So it's almost like
mhm,
concocting a fake heart. If I could
mhm,
use an example, it's like a heart transplant, but I'm not talking here medically, I'm talking here
mhm,
psychologically. I'm borrowing emotions that don't really belong to me just to make
mhm,
believe that it's authentic. And I think my wife was picking up on that.
mhm,
And there's no replacement for this. In other words, there's no shtick. This was Rabbi Steinsaltz's point. This is
mhm.
not about anybody knowing. He said, nobody in the world is going to know this. Only you
Right.
and God. Only you and God. In other words, people will like it. You're a good guy and you're doing
Sure.
good things. Not like you're telling anybody to, burn down their house or be cruel. You're giving good messages, but
Right.
it's messages that are coming from a mouthpiece, and
Right.
messages that are coming from a mouthpiece, they can get much better from a different mouthpiece or from a book. So it's really, it's very subtle. And I have to say, this is something i still I still work on, because how deep is the
Right.
experience of what I'm saying? If I'm
Mhm,
teaching, let's say, a Hasidic discourse from the Alter Rebbe, from the founder of Chabad, or from the Rebbe, and it talks about the fact that we all come from a space of infinity. And pre creation, there was only infinity. And then creation is simply the perception of finiteness and the fact that God wanted us to experience infinity through finiteness. And that empowers people to be able to go in to every space of their life, but knowing that they are really pure infinite consciousness. I
mhm,
could teach these words, I can give examples, I can give illustrations. But if I'm not experiencing my life this way, with my own challenges and my own darkness, ultimately the energy gets stuck and it gets entangled with my own stuff. Another very important thing is all teachers, communicators, parents, rebbes, mentors, leaders, they can only change people to the degree that they're ready to change themselves.
mhm.
Ultimately, the only thing we really teach at the end of the day is who we are. And this is also very subtle. You say, no, it's not true. I teach very beautiful concepts and extraordinary concepts. What we're really teaching, the energy that really comes through from people and that goes into people's hearts, it's the energy that I am really internalizing, that I am really open to. So the more I am a channel, the more my ego is not present in any class, speech, lecture, clip, interview, the more God's wisdom is coming through. If
Mhm,
God's wisdom is coming through, it's going to be life changing because it's real. It's infinite. It's God's wisdom. If it's
mhm,
YY Jacobson's ego coming through, so it's insecure. So
mhm,
it's wounded. So
mhm,
it's filled with all types of defenders, with deceptions, with cover-ups, with blockages. That's the energy that's coming through. And deep down in their soul, people will know the difference. I watched many years the Rebbe talk. I grew up in Crown Heights, and I had the privilege of literally growing up at the feet of the Rebbe. And almost every Shabbos, the Rebbe had a public gathering. And this is like a childhood memory, and I even feel funny saying it. And it just came back to me recently. The Rebbe would sometimes have a Farbrengen for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. There were Farbrengens of 7, 8 hours. Okay. He spoke to thousands of people, and I have to say, honestly, a lot of people were not listening. The Rebbe wasn't an entertainer and a dramatic speaker. He could get very dramatic, but it was all organic. So sometimes the Rebbe would speak in somewhat of a monotone voice and very, very long. And it was pushy and it was hard. There were people who fell asleep. There were people who were not listening. And then the Rebbe would finish a Farbrengen. I happened at a very young age to start listening, and I had the privilege of becoming in the Rebbe's last years of his talks. I was on the group of oral scribes that would transcribe the Rebbe's talks. And when he would finish a Farbrengen, I often, this is as a teenager, I would tell myself, doesn't the Rebbe want some feedback? Like nobody's giving him any feedback. He just spoke for 4 hours, 5 hours. He doesn't get an applause. Nobody comes over to him and says, wow, that was amazing. That was brilliant. And he would stand up and he would go to daven. He would pray mincha or ma'ariv or go back to his office. And a moment later, he was in a completely different mode. And I asked myself, is he getting feedback? Does he want feedback? Is he craving feedback? As I grew up, I realized that when the Rebbe spoke, he went into a flow, and he was just a completely organic channel. Now, he did often lament about the fact that people are not listening and people are not appreciating, because he did want to know that his words had an impact, and that's important feedback. It's constructive. It's constructive feedback to know, do people understand? Are people interested? Are people engaged? But in terms of the feedback, like, tell me I was good, so I can feel better about myself. I realized that comes from a wounded self that does not fill its own void from its own soul being its best friend. So that was a very, very fascinating experience. Another thing I would see by the Rebbe is he was in his 80s and he could suddenly start crying out of the blue. He said something and he wouldn't cry before and he wouldn't cry after. Sometimes when we start crying in the middle of a speech, like we allow those tears to carry over to the next sentence and paragraph because it adds a lot of luster and drama. Like the Rebbe could say something, start crying, stop crying, and then go to the next subject. And I didn't expect him. Like, it didn't look like he's going to become emotional. Then I realized that he was completely one with his words. Like there was no separateness between the speech, the speaker, and the soul of the speaker. That was it still remains a very powerful lesson, something to aspire to.
Wow. I mean, you said something similar, like about a week or two ago, you were speaking to the graduating class of social workers, and you said that if you don't work on your own personal traumas every single day, then you can't show up as a rabbi, just like they should be working on their own personal issues, because you can't show up to help anybody unless you're working on your own issues. So I'm curious to understand, and I'm sure people here would want to hear, like, so how does one do that? How do you do that? How do you work on those personal issues?
Yeah. So first of all, I think the premise is critical, and people often don't realize how critical it is, because again, it's not conscious corruption. It's not that the therapist or the rabbi is going to sit down with a client and consciously distort a message because they're not worked out. There are people who are very sick, but we're not talking about that. Those are people who are sick and they need a lot of help. We're talking about us people who are more or less, trying to help and be nice and be kind and do the right thing. But the fact is that it's the internal things that I am entangled with. And as long as I don't disentangle, I don't even realize how much
you give us an example?
there is. Of course. Sometimes I spoke to a therapist the other day whom I know very, very well. And we're close friends, and I asked him a question. Because I know I also struggle with this, and I think it's not so comfortable to talk about, but I'm bringing it out because I think we have to be honest about these things. And I told him, I know you're a very popular marriage therapist. I know many women come to you individually without their husbands. I'm sure sometimes you meet a very intelligent woman who finds comfort in you much more than in her husband, because she could tell you things she's not telling your husband. There is an intimacy that's created in that room. You're giving her advice that may be saving her life. She's spilling all the beans. What do you do if your mind gets overtaken by some form of emotion that is inappropriate outside of your own spouse. This is another woman. I'm just wondering how you deal with it. And he said to me, he looked at me, and without skipping a heartbeat, he says, this is one of the most important questions that I have to ask myself every day. And the first thing I know is that if I'm not honest with myself, if I cannot acknowledge that this is what's happening in the office right now, I must tell her that I cannot be her therapist, because I will be destroying her life rather than helping her life, because in a subconscious way, I will want to keep this relationship going. I want her to come back. I'm gaining out of the therapy too. This relationship is doing something for me. So here, it almost seems like he's a nice person. He likes her. He's here for her. He may even be sending her a text to find out how she's doing at night. And nothing non-kosher dramatic happened, but really, he's not her therapist anymore. There's something he's getting out of this. So who knows if subconsciously the advice he's giving her in many ways is not helping her marriage. It's advice that's keeping her in the office. So he told me, if I'm not honest about this, first thing, if I am not brutally honest that there's something very exciting about the meeting, I'm almost looking forward to her visit. This is a recipe for absolute destruction. And I know how many people have been hurt by therapists and rabbis who are not worked out.
Right, for
sure. And this is true for all of us. And the first thing is honesty, brutal honesty. And then I have to ask myself the next question. Do I have the resources to be able to acknowledge this challenge I have and really be a therapist for this woman or for this man? So that's just one classic example.
Do you think that,
more.
I mean, that's a good example. Do you think anyone could be so honest? Do you think that women should be seeing male therapists or vice versa?
I think there are more challenges than are acknowledged in this, because there are deep emotions that come up and we're not even in control of them, and it's nobody's fault. It's not like anybody's trying to do anything wrong. 100%. And therefore I think if you don't have a support system and people you trust who can challenge you, and you can make what we call a cheshbon hanefesh, a real reckoning of the soul of what's happening and how it's affecting you, then you really have to be very, very careful. Because in an unconscious way, it's going to be hurtful. And I know with myself, sometimes I give classes, people come for counseling, and things trigger me. There's things that trigger me. Sometimes the person I find to be so clueless and obnoxious, and I feel that I hate them. But if I hate them, how am I going to help them? I just want to slap them in their face and say, you have narcissistic personality disorder. Get out of my life right now. I could say that, and I may even be right, maybe not. But I really have to come from a different place if I want to help them. I remember a story I heard from the Rebbe himself, also a life-changing story. He's heard this from his father-in-law, who heard it all the way back from the source, that the Mittler Rebbe is the second Chabad Rebbe, the son of the founder of Chabad, the son of the Alter Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Dovber, and he was seeing people in a city called Vitebsk in Belarus, and somebody came to see him. In the middle of the conversation, he interrupted the encounter, and he told his secretary that he cannot see any people any longer. And for 3 days, he was in isolation, and later they knew he was fasting. He was praying, he was reciting Psalms, he was meditating, and they heard him crying from the other side of the door. It took 3 days until he resumed the conversations with people. His son asked him what happened, and he said that somebody came here seeking counsel, and this is what he said. Any person who comes here with a problem, I could not help them if I first don't find that struggle within my own soul. Even if it's not identical, but I have to find a glimmer, a residue, a reflection of this struggle in myself, and then I can assist them. Today, somebody came and he shared something so heinous that he did, and try as I did, I could not find even a subtle reflection of it in my soul. But I knew that God sent him to me, which means I'm supposed to help him. But I can't help him if I don't identify the struggle in myself. And then I realized that this must be subconscious inside of me. So it's something that I'm unaware of, which is much worse. So I needed 3 days to do inner work and discover it. And he told his son, I discovered it. And he called him back and he helped him out. I heard the story from the Rebbe.
Right. Wow.
And I think to myself constantly, come on, why did he have to identify it in himself? This guy is a obnoxious or rude person who did a horrible, horrible thing. What does it have to do with me? Now help him. The Rebbe said it doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
because you'll never be able to understand, empathize, and help repair the
Mhm.
wound in the other person if you don't find it inside yourself. And perhaps
Right.
the deepest idea is I never change other people. I can only
Mhm.
change me.
Right.
I can only
Right.
change me. And by changing me energetically, I can affect that change around me. But if I
Mhm.
don't have it inside of me, there's nothing in me to change. So look at the standard that he created for himself.
Hmm.
When a person
Wow.
is sitting in front of me, I have to be able to
Mhm.
say, where is this inside of me?
Mhm.
Is it inside of me? And if it's not, it just means I don't know about it, which means it's more lethal because
Mhm.
it's impacting me subconsciously. So it's more,
Right.
at least if it's consciously, I can look at it. Now I can't even look at it.
Right. Wow. Wow. You mentioned before vulnerability. Do you think that we're very into like being vulnerable today? Should we be as vulnerable as people want us to be? Do you feel you're vulnerable? Can you be vulnerable as as a rabbi, as a person of that people respect? And when should people be vulnerable?
Wow, what a beautiful question. I have found that my greatest and deepest impact is due to my vulnerability. I've never had feedback from people like the feedback I received when they heard something truly vulnerable from me. Even if it's a little clip that I send out, my
Hmm.
office sends out, but it's a vulnerable clip, the feedback I receive is disproportionately more powerful. And the
So
same
is
is
there
true.
is there anything that should be private and not out there, like not that we share to
Yeah, I,
others to
I
be
think we have to
vulnerable?
understand the role of vulnerability. The role of
Hmm.
vulnerability is what allows us to experience real attachment.
Hmm.
But what does attachment mean? My attachment with my audience is not the same like my attachment with my children or my attachment
Hmm.
with my spouse. So the
Hmm.
level of vulnerability is different. So vulnerability is what attaches us to people. Because vulnerability means, oh, Rabbi YY is human. Oh, wow, he struggles. Oh, he has anxiety. Oh, he used to pull his hair. Oh, he has an ego. Oh, he has weaknesses. Oh, wow. So he's not sitting in an ivory tower throwing out expert advice. He's struggling. Wow, I'm also struggling. So let
Hmm.
me tune in. It creates trust, it creates attachment, it creates human connection, and there's no substitute for that. That's the power of vulnerability. But
But
what
you're
does
not
attachment, right? What
you're
does
not
attach,
necessarily sharing, your
exactly,
issues with your children or your
right?
personal issues, your
Because
issues
that,
with
that,
your wife.
that would be inappropriate. That would be
Right.
really trespassing and taking an intimate relationship that doesn't belong to this audience. My
Mhm.
mother, when I was a kid, my mother shared with me something, and it shaped a way of how do you respond. There was once a secular Jewish woman who came to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and not knowing, the Rebbe's custom and his, the Orthodox and the tradition of Jewish law. At the end, like a good woman with proper etiquette, she stretched out her hand to give the Rebbe a handshake, right? So the Rebbe looked at her, and the way he responded was profound and moving. He said, when I was yet a young child, my mother taught me not to touch something that does not belong to me.
Mhm.
That's what he said. He didn't say Jewish law doesn't allow me to do it. He said, when I was
Mhm.
young, my mother taught me not to touch something that doesn't belong to me. A relationship with my spouse or with my child or with myself, there's parts that don't belong to the audience. It would be inappropriate. It would be disrespectful also to them
Mhm.
and certainly to the other
Mhm.
people. So the vulnerability of those relationships, which creates attachment, is about the nature of that attachment, addressing those wounds or those sore points or those difficulties that are affecting that relationship. And
Mhm.
that's the relationship of a marriage, the relationship between parents and children, the relationship between a person and their close friend or their therapist or their rabbi or their confidant. With my audience, the nature of attachment is that I want to share with them wisdom that is authentic, that is real.
Mhm.
So the more
Mhm.
I could share from my heart, the more powerful it is. So I feel that today, the only language that is really, really effective is vulnerability. And you'll see the impact of people who are being vulnerable in their conversations and authentic. It's of a different level. In fact, I
So you're
would
saying
say,
it's not oversharing, and it's very different than oversharing. Do you feel people do overshare today?
I think, like everything, our animal consciousness, with its defenders and its sly, manipulative exercises in order to make sure it gets the validation it needs, can
Mhm.
use anything to
Mhm.
become another way of hiding the truth, including vulnerability.
Mhm.
Sometimes vulnerability can be manipulative and exploitative because I'm being vulnerable. Oh, he's being so honest.
Mhm.
I heard the other day a speaker get up. initially I heard the speech. It was nice. It was moving. I was moved. And then when I went home to my room, I said, why don't I like this? There's something that's bothering me. There's something that's bothering me. And then I realized this was a person speaking to people who suffered a lot of pain in Israel. They dealt a lot
Mhm.
of, and this person spoke for 45 minutes, and it was a very vulnerable conversation. But then I realized all they spoke about was themselves. Everything
Mhm.
was about themselves. And then I realized how careful I have to be. We have to be, because vulnerability sometimes becomes a new entertainment method.
Right.
What's more entertaining than Rabbi YY Jacobson spilling the beans? That's
Right.
entertaining. What he said, a nice joke. And that's
Right.
what everything can be used.
Mhm.
Everything, even holy things, sacred things, can be manipulative if it's not worked out. If the vulnerability is coming from a place of authenticity,
Mhm.
then it's very powerful. But if it's coming from a place that I need to make sensationalism, I need to
Mhm.
create sensationalism, so I get more validation, then the vulnerability is just an ego trip. And you
Right.
could see it. And again, sometimes people don't notice it right away. Sensitive people will notice it. Other people will feel it at some point. But the
Mhm.
communicator himself or herself, if they're honest, they will right away know the difference. There's also
Right.
sometimes
Very true.
vulnerability. There's sometimes vulnerability that's just part of the toolbox. It's almost like, you know, speakers know now it's time for a story. Now it's time
Right.
for a joke. Okay, let's bring out some vulnerability. But
Mhm.
it's disassociation. It's
It's just
disconnected.
a tool, right?
It's a tool. And the
It's
moment it's
just
a
the
tool,
mouthpiece, right?
it's a mouthpiece, and a good
Mhm.
mouthpiece knows how to be vulnerable too.
Mhm.
Put in the right story, and you know exactly what to say, what not to say.
Mhm.
Even the vulnerability is completely controlled.
Mhm. For sure. Wow. So talking about vulnerability, can you share with us something that you feel is your biggest failure?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that I grew up. This is I would call it a challenge more than a failure, because it became a failure. But it's really, as I learned, it's a challenge that I have to confront. I grew up with a lot of anxiety, and
Mhm.
I still don't know the exact source and reasons for it all. It's a work in progress. But certainly part of it is, at a very young age, I was identified as a very talented communicator and speaker. I gave
Mm.
my first speech at a dinner of my yeshiva at age 5.
Wow.
And
Wow.
since then, the career stuck to me. So whenever the class needed a speaker, I was there. Now, a lot of
That's a lot of pressure on
it's a
such a
lot of
young
pressure.
kid. Sure.
So there was a lot of pressure, and as a result of that, I didn't always have the inner ability and the resource and even the knowledge to know how to always go back to myself and know, where am I in this process? How am I
Mhm.
feeling? How am I experiencing it? It's almost like the mouthpiece
Mhm.
sometimes created a self-contained reality.
Mhm.
And I didn't know this for many years because I was just living it, and
Mhm.
I did good things with it. Good things happened. Thank God. It could have been used in different ways. It was used,
Mhm.
at least most times, I think, for constructive purposes. But I had to learn, and I still have to learn always about the integration and the connection, and realizing that every talent, as great as it is, its power is simply as a divine gift, and
Mhm.
therefore I never own it, and therefore it's never the source of my validation. And the only thing I own is the fact that God created me as His channel. And
Mhm.
the moment if I can own that awareness, that's the only thing I really own. I don't own anything else. I don't own my oxygen. I don't own my brain. I don't own my 70 trillion cells. I don't own my house. The bank owns it. I don't own anything.
So
All
that
I can
was
own is the
that was
awareness that I'm a channel.
so that was your greatest challenge, you're saying? That
And certainly,
anxiety?
I think that was certainly a great challenge.
But
Certainly a great
but
challenge
no
that I had.
failures that come to
The
mind?
struggle, as a result of that, many failures. The
Uh-huh.
inability to often be authentic, the
Mhm.
inability to be authentic, the
Mhm.
inability to integrate, the inability to be truly true to myself, a lot of failures that came with that.
Mhm. Mhm. What would you say was your greatest accomplishment?
I think one of the accomplishments that I am very grateful for is that growing up at the feet of the Rebbe, this is a gift that God gave me.
Well, something that you did.
Yeah, the gift that God gave me is that I managed my soul, I guess, knew that it should hang around the Rebbe as often as
Mhm.
possible
Mhm.
and absorb his words, even when I didn't always understand them or relate to them or experience them.
Mhm.
And today, as I grow older, I see how enriched
Mhm.
my soul was. And in my search for my own authenticity, how much that helps me. I don't know why I don't even take credit for it, because it was just, I guess, something that my soul felt. It
Mm-hmm.
was a divine gift, but something I'm very grateful for.
Mm-hmm. What would you say you're most proud of in your career or in your life?
I think I'm proud of one of the things I'm proud of is I think I chose the best wife in the world,
That's great.
both to challenge me and stimulate me and really guide me with tremendous love and wisdom and authenticity. Another thing I'm very proud of is how my children challenge me every day to become a much better person. And I'm proud of the fact that I feel deep down that I'm always searching for authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm allergic. I'm allergic to lies and deception and cover-ups, even though I often, and especially in my past, have fallen victim to those deceptions and lies.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's why I'm so allergic to it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Wow.
that allergicness is something that it means so much to me, because I see the difference. I just see the pain and the anxiety that comes from disassociation and from living a life of cover-ups. Like, if I'm not ready to look at everything in me, myself, every skeleton, every ghost, every demon, every wound, I feel that life just becomes so impoverished and so shallow and so narrow.
So
I'm
when you
just an
feel
actor.
that inauthenticity, what do you do?
Who I pause, I
Mhm.
breathe, I talk to somebody I trust about it. I learn, I meditate, I
Mhm.
pray.
Okay, good things.
Exercise, I do exercise.
Oh, great.
Exercise is not a lie, because exercise brings you in touch with the body, and the
Mhm.
body never lies. You
Mhm.
know, the Chabad Rebbe's, one of the most beautiful insights from the Baal Shem Tov and all of the Hasidic masters and the Chabad school especially, is that the body is the seat of truth. They call it the guf is from Atzmos. The body doesn't have opinions. The body just says the truth. You know, if I come into a room and my body is reacting with anxiety, my body didn't give an opinion. We sometimes think our body gives opinions. No, the body just said the truth. The
Mhm.
body just acknowledged there's something going on here. There's something difficult. Maybe you should be in the room, maybe not. But awareness of the body is awareness of something very authentic and raw
What if the
in
body is
our life.
craving a piece of chocolate cake right now?
That's excellent, excellent question. So the body is craving a piece of chocolate. I think that the body is saying something real. There's a void inside of you.
Mhm.
The language that my body has become used to is, if there's a void inside of me, chocolate will solve the problem. Binging will solve the problem. If I could take, if I could take pause
Mhm.
and be curious, what is that chocolate going to do for me? That very craving is going to bring me to a very deep place of authenticity. So the body is saying something true. You're craving something because you're empty.
But you're not
There's a
only
reason you're
listening to the
empty.
body. You can't only listen to the body, I guess.
Right. The body often is trained to camouflage what it's really looking for.
Mhm.
That's why the connection between mind, body, and soul is so
Mhm.
important.
Mhm.
But the body will always be giving you a signal of something true that is going on. And sometimes I can't solve it. I have this void. The
Mhm.
body is just saying the truth, and respecting that truth is very powerful. The Rebbe once taught, this is a talk from, I have a Zoom with England in 2 minutes.
Okay.
The Rebbe once gave a talk in 1951, and he said that the Torah says, whatever God tells Abraham, whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her.
Right.
And he said the Zohar says that Abraham represents the soul, Sarah represents the body. What does it mean? Whatever your body says, listen to you.
Mhm.
The Rebbe said something incredible. He said, Avraham and Sarah, it says that the Talmud says in Baba Basra, they lived in redemptive consciousness. Olam chater
Mhm.
b'chayecha. He says, and in redemptive consciousness, the soul gets all of its signals from the body. So
Mhm.
God told Abraham, whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her, because the body keeps
Right.
the divine score.
Wow. One more question. Was there ever a question that stumped you, and what was it?
There's constantly questions that stump me, and the profoundest question that stumps me is the pain that people go through,
Mhm.
the pain and the challenge and the suffering that people go
What do you think
through.
is the biggest challenge of our generation?
I think the biggest challenge of our generation is the challenge of finding our truest intimacy with ourselves and with God. Our generation is searching for redemptive consciousness and complete alignment with ourselves and God. And our struggle to get there is one of our greatest challenges and our gifts.
Wow, beautiful. I have so many more questions I would love to ask you, but I respect your time, and I really thank you so
I'm
much
sorry. I
for.
just have a Zoom with
No
London with a
problem.
bunch of teenagers giving
No.
teenagers advice. I hope my teenage girl doesn't hear this one.
Good luck.
Listen, this was a
Thank.
wonderful conversation. We could do a follow-up.
Absolutely, it'd be wonderful. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
doing this. We really
Thank you.
appreciate it, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And a lot of hatzlacha in your holy work to spread the light.
Thank you. Wow, what a great interview with Rabbi YY Jacobson. I felt like I could just sit and listen for another hour or more and ask him so many more questions. My takeaway from this is the idea of authenticity that he really keeps talking about, and how we are all really channels for giving of ourselves and our talents. And we need to look at it in that way, how in order to be authentic people, we need to realize that it's not about us. It's not about our ego. It's not about how we're feeling at this moment, or it's not about how we want to feel at this moment, but it's about a bigger picture. It's about what we're here for. And I think, he's such a famous personality who is so busy with so many good things. And I really enjoyed the fact that he is constantly working on himself and working on that authenticity and being genuine, and not letting it be about your ego, but being something so much greater. You look at the whole picture and look at what you can do to connect to people, rather than it being all about your own ego and your own personality and your own self. And I felt that was a message that we really could take into so many areas of our own lives, that so often we're so caught up with the me and the ego that we generally forget the whole picture, whether it be in our relationships, whether it be in our parenting, whether it be with our help in community work, or in any area that we are talented as well. If we can just realize that we are just that funnel, that channel, then the pressure that on us becomes so much more released, and the work that we can do can be exponentially so much greater. If you enjoy watching these interviews, please make sure that you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary. Please look for us as well on our podcast channels. We are available on Apple, Spotify. Look for Ordinary People, Extraordinary Stories. Give us a like there, download, say something there, give us a heart, say some comment about what you enjoyed. It would really mean the world to us if you do. As well, I really enjoy getting your feedback. I love reading it. I love reading your personal issues of how this related to you, how you took it personally, how something in the interview is something that you really connected with. I'd love to hear, what did you connect with on this interview? Thank you again for listening, and thank you so much for being part of such an extraordinary community.